Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Victor Gallego. And so just a few house rules. Please do not be on your phone. If you're caught, we will remind you, just as a fair warning. But also give your undivided attention, please.
Hello, everyone. Aloha. Thank you. Thank you for talking back. So my name's Mike, and I'm here to talk about compassion, right? That's what you guys are here for too. Nobody's here to get a business lecture or anything like that. That's not why I'm here. So I'm a human being, first and foremost. I'm a cisgender heterosexual man. I'm married 22 years to Julie, who's my wife. Lovely woman, very happy with her. I have 5 children, and we're going to talk about suffering today, and having 5 children is suffering. Okay. No, they're great kids, actually. I'm also a mental health therapist. I've been practicing therapy for 18 years. I'm pretty good at it now. I've worked here at NAU since July of last year, lived in Flagstaff that same amount of time. So I haven't been here that long in Flagstaff, but I really enjoy being here. I really enjoy the campus community. It's been a great job so far, a great place to live. So we're here to talk about compassion. So I'm going to start the talk with a little video. So we're ready for the video whenever you are.
Scrawny, chubby, short,
queer.
Getting caught up in bullying, it's so easy because you're just glad that you're not being bullied.
It's been hard for me to stand up for other people because I feel like I'm already a target.
It's just easier to do nothing.
Please stop.
Fine.
Dude, ow.
Fine.
Stop.
Fine.
Ow, stop.
Do you have any friends?
Yes, I heard you.
What are you even doing here? It's almost too easy.
Stop.
Come on.
I get it.
Maybe you are a little bit more.
Scrawny.
Do you have any friends?
Yes, I heard you.
What are you even doing here? It's almost too easy.
Stop.
Come on.
I get it.
Maybe you are a little bit more.
You think you're special?
One more Virginia meal.
Dude, stop.
You're fine.
I just opened it up and it's all smashed.
Did you order bullied or unbullied?
Bullied or unbullied?
Yeah. Do you have a manager that I can speak to? Because that doesn't even make any sense. Hi, your manager?
Hi, how's it going?
I was given this.
Did you bully this burger?
Well, yeah. This is a defenseless Whopper Jr. He can't defend himself.
I don't mean anything by it.
It's just for laughs.
Just for laughs.
Just give me my burger, man.
What is going on here?
What are you? Is there something wrong with you?
Because that's clearly what happened.
You can't be serious. Had you seen me bullying this burger, would you have stood up and said something?
Yeah.
It's good to know.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Yeah. What's your name?
Reed.
Hi, Reese.
We're just having fun.
You having fun? He's not having fun. So therefore, I think you guys should just leave him alone.
Clear. This feels better to me.
Have you ever been, like, messed with before?
Oh my God. Like the ideal world is where if somebody else sees like something weird happening, that they'll come over and be like, hey, this is not okay.
Yeah.
To feel defenseless, that's one of the worst things in the world. Chelsea came and she would just tell them that it's not okay because it isn't.
Something I'll never forget is my friend standing up for me.
I've been that kid, so if I see it, I'm gonna do something about it. And I hope there's more people out there like that.
Okay, so obviously that's not a video about compassion. I actually had another video in its place earlier this week, and then I came across this one, and I thought it kind of accomplished the purposes of today. So we're going to talk about a really important topic, and we'll talk about some of the intellectual kind of pieces of that. But really what I hope that you walk away from this with is that you felt something. Okay, that you felt something a little bit different, that you felt that you wanted to act in some way based on the talk today, based on our time together. So I'm going to ask out loud, and you guys can just shout out answers. I don't think we have enough time to do the mic, but what did you guys think of the video? What did you experience when you watched the video? Oh, okay. People online. So we'll get you a mic. I guess you'll have to raise your hand up if you want to say something. Yes, sir. It was funny? Right. Right. Yeah. The looks on the customers' faces were hilarious too. Yeah. Good. Anyone else? The video was a little choppy. Oh, do we have another one?
They cared about the food and not the people. I don't know.
Right. Like, did you see the statistics up there? 95% of people who got a crappy burger complained about it. And what percentage was it that complained about the bullying or did something about the bullying? 12, 15, something like that. That's pretty sad. I feel sad when I watch this video. Did anyone else feel sad when they watched how the kid was treated? Yeah. I mean, obviously they were actors, but the customers in the store didn't know that, right? Okay, what else did you notice? Anyone? Right. Right. You saw the looks on the customers' faces too, right? Yeah, totally. I noticed that too. Good. Anything else? Okay. What did you guys notice about the two individuals that stepped in? What did they do? We have someone in the back.
So they stepped in and basically were very direct in saying that that's not okay. And kind of got the feeling that they probably most likely had had those experiences themselves, which probably made them more willing to stand up for somebody else because they probably experienced those things themselves in the past.
Right. Yeah, and we actually heard that from both of them, right? The kid asked the one woman who stepped in, has anything ever, happened to you like this? And she said, yeah. And then the other guy mentioned that as well. So you're kind of touching on a really important part of compassion, I think. So part of what makes us compassionate or makes us act is that we feel something, right? Like we feel with, or we feel what another person's feeling. That's called empathy. Okay. So empathy is sort of required to participate in compassion. Any other thoughts on the video? All right, we'll move forward. Maybe. Okay, so we're going to separate compassion from a couple of other concepts. The first being altruism. So altruism is a concept really that speaks to like an overall attitude. Okay, so benevolence is another word that I think of with altruism. So you probably can think of people, I put Mother Teresa up here, but you can probably think of other people who just are do-gooders, right? Like they just do good things, and they do good things in different circumstances, and sometimes they devote their whole lives to doing good. So that's altruism. And we're going to talk about empathy, and hopefully this video works a little bit better. It's not so choppy.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Okay, so this, Brene Brown, has anyone heard of Brene Brown before? A couple of people in the room. So Brene Brown is a researcher at the University of Houston who studies shame. She's been studying shame for about 15 years. And what she's found is that empathy is kind of the antidote to shame. And we're only bringing up empathy in the context of compassion because, like I said, we need to understand what it's like to feel with someone or to feel what they're feeling. And the thing that I like best that she says in that video is that we have to connect with something inside of ourselves that understands a little bit about what it's like to feel what that other person's feeling. Okay, it requires that we go sort of inward in order to connect. And we're going to talk about why that's important with compassion as well. All right, let's go to the next video. Now we're going to get into compassion more specifically.
My friend told me he often went to the same little corner grocery store in his neighborhood. One day, he realized that though it was usually the same woman working there each time, he hardly ever noticed much about her. He felt shocked at himself and thought, for all I really pay attention to her, she might as well be a cash register with arms. So he went into the store, determined to actually pay full attention to her. The first thing he noticed was that she was singing along to something playing on the radio, and that she had a really beautiful voice. When he said that to her, she responded with a wide, radiant smile. As soon as he told me that story, I realized that I too often went into the same store and also had hardly noticed that woman, except for maybe a vague sense that perhaps she was a little grim. I made a plan. I'm going to go into the store, say to her, "I heard you have a really beautiful voice," and watch her get really happy and give me a beautiful smile. But when I went into the store, actually paying full attention to her, the first thing I noticed was that she was already smiling broadly. Wait, what happened to a little bit grim? I realized again how much of a person we miss when we don't pay attention. People are people, not pieces of furniture. We each have a life, a story, changing moods, joys, sorrows. And if we pay attention to one another, we recognize that, and our lives are enriched by a continuing sense of discovery. That's the opening to true compassion. Sometimes we think of compassion as a gift, which we've either gotten or we haven't. If we haven't, we're out of luck. Or we think of compassion as some kind of emotional reaction that spontaneously erupts out of us. I think of compassion as a natural result that comes from actually paying attention. That means we can continue to cultivate it.
I don't know why these videos are all made with animals as people. I've never understood that. So with compassion, now we're learning a little bit more. So we're kind of layering on, right? So altruism is this desire to kind of do good, and empathy is the ability to kind of resonate and be in touch with someone on a feeling level. And now we're adding compassion. So the things that Sharon Salzberg is a meditation teacher in Massachusetts. So she adds a couple of key components. So one key component is we have to notice, right? Like we have to notice that someone's struggling or suffering in some way. And, you know, that's not always easy to do. We've got a lot of things in our mind. We're busy, we're distracted. And so just noticing, which sounds like such a simple thing, but it's really a key component of having compassion. And then the other thing that we added to define compassion is that it's action. Okay, so where empathy is feeling with someone, compassion is acting in their behalf, right? So when the I can't remember the animal it was, walked by with a cake and dumped the cake on the ground. Ooh, yeah, ow, been there, that sucks, you know. But instead of just noticing and feeling, she added that component of action. So in that vein, on your way out, I want you to stop at the table up here. And I did some random act of kindness cards, attached some chocolate to make it more appealing to you. So take one of those with you when you go. And if you feel inspired and if you want to, you can act, okay, when you leave here. And action doesn't always have to be you know, we think sometimes we have to be Mother Teresa or Gandhi or, you know, Dalai Lama to make a difference in the world, to make an impact. But it's not like that. You can make a difference through small actions. Okay. Let's see. It's not working. Okay. So we're just going to talk a little bit about kind of the religious roots of compassion. This is, I hesitated to talk about this a little bit in a higher education setting because we're a secular institution and we look at things that way. But a lot of the world kind of gets their training or their inspiration or their capacity or their opportunities to be compassionate through religion, through spiritual practice. And we find compassion practices and teachings across all the major religions of the world, whether it's Christianity, Judaism, I updated this slide with Buddhism and some other things on there, which isn't showing up. But so these teachings are universal. That's the point, I guess, in bringing this up, is that human beings have this universal kind of desire. Oh, they're there. Cool. One of the things that the Buddhists believe, which I think is really important, and this is part of the secular definition too, is that compassion really flows in three directions, is the word I'll use, flows. So we think of compassion as being something that we do for other people, and that's definitely one of the directions of compassion. But if you've, I've been a therapist for 18 years, and I can tell you, if I don't take good care of myself, then I'm not going to be able to be compassionate and to give to other people. So, showing self-compassion, so that self-to-self direction. And then one that I think is really hard, and we don't think about it a lot, is how do we receive compassion? So from others to ourselves, do we allow people to help us? Do we ask for help when we need it? And if we're not doing that, then our capacity for compassion for others or for ourselves is going to be somewhat limited. So for those of you who are faculty and staff in the room, we've got a compassion series of workshops that we're doing starting at the end of February, and we'll hit each one of these things. So starting with self-compassion, compassion for others, and then allowing others to help us, and kind of learning how to ask for help. Whoops, I did that, didn't I? Now it's working. So the Dalai Lama just highlights this idea that in order for us to connect to our feelings and be compassionate for others, we have to take care of ourselves. Did anyone go to the self-care workshop, or not workshop, but like event yesterday? Okay, there was a big event on campus where they talked essentially about self-compassion. Okay, so we're to the secular definition of compassion. So looking at 4 components, and there's lots of definitions of compassion out there, and they're right? They're right, and they're right, and they're right, and they're right. As we look about the research that's being done on compassion, which is a lot of research on compassion and altruism and these kinds of things is being done at Stanford University. They actually have a institute that's devoted its work to compassion and altruism and those kind of concepts. So we're looking at an awareness, which we talked about before. We're looking at the affective component, so that empathy component, so feeling with somebody. And then, this is where I get stuck a lot too. So maybe I want to help, so I have that intention or that desire to help. And then, just outing myself, like sometimes it doesn't go past that, right? Sometimes I don't get to the action stage. Sometimes my intention's there. And that's important because you will have opportunities to act if you set that intention to do good, to act. And then the motivation is the actual readiness to act and to help. So we're going to talk a little bit now about so these are definitions of compassion. But I want you to think about somebody, or think about compassion in your mind. And think about, what does compassion look like? What does it sound like? We've seen example in the Burger King video of ways that people acted compassionately. But I want you to just think in your mind's eye for a second and think, what does compassion look like? And Nancy Eisenberg, who's a psychology professor at Arizona State, has actually done some research on what compassion looks like. She works in developing compassion for children. So she does a lot of work with kids, and kids, don't have the cognitive capacity to go through all these definitions of compassion. So she studied, how do kids respond to people, and what do we kind of communicate? And she's actually found that there's a physical characteristic associated with compassion. So it's the face, right? Side tilt to the head and the concerned eyes. And this woman has added the okay. In contrast, for people who have been through really difficult experiences, we've studied people who go through traumatic events in their lives. And one of the tools that we use to see how people are affected by trauma is this task where people are tasked to click on a compassionate face. They're shown a bunch of faces on a screen, and they have a mouse, and they click on the one that they think is compassionate. And they measure response time. So how long does it take for a person to find a compassionate face? And it turns out that people who have been through trauma have a harder time. It takes them longer to identify compassion, which is really interesting to me. They're really fast at identifying angry faces, and maybe for obvious reasons. But this is a pretty consistent finding that if you've been mistreated, if you've been hurt, you have a hard time seeing good in other people. So what does compassion sound like? Oh wait, we got one more on what it looks like. I hope this one shows up. So another study looked at facial characteristics with compassion. And I thought this was kind of freaky and interesting at the same time. So they put together all of these different images of compassionate faces, and this is what they kind of, this was the result, I guess, that another kind of look to compassion. Can you see the difference between the two? Yeah? Good for you. Hopefully you haven't experienced trauma. Okay, it's hard for me to see it a little bit, but I thought it was kind of interesting. So what does compassion sound like? Go ahead and play it.
Aww.
We'll play it again.
Aww.
Aww. These are actually the staff in my office. We all got together and did the sound of compassion.
Aww.
Aww. But we recognize that, right? Like hopefully we've had someone in our lives that's been compassionate to us and kind to us, and you've fallen, skinned your knee, or your friends treat you like crap, and you come home and you talk to this caregiving person and they say, oh dang it, oh man. Okay, so you can kind of relate to that. I saw a lot of smiles in the audience.
Aww.
I think it's fun. Okay, so we'll kind of run through some of this a little bit quickly, but I want to argue today. I don't want to argue. I want to talk about how we're sort of predisposed, if you will, to compassion. Okay, so you heard in the Sharon Salzberg video that some of us think of compassion as something that we have or we don't have, right? You know people, you've met people who you're like, oh yeah, that's a really compassionate person, and maybe you've compared yourself to them, and maybe you don't feel that compassionate, okay, because you're making those comparisons. Don't do that. Don't make comparisons. Okay. Well, I just wanted to look at some of Darwin's work. So Darwin, we attribute to sort of this phrase that's gotten twisted over the years, to survival of the fittest, right? So he looked at natural selection and came up with these kind of characteristics that help species perpetuate themselves over eons, right? Over lots of time. And actually one of the so his work was taken a little was twisted a little bit. He actually said that sympathy is our strongest instinct. So when you look at survival of the fittest, it's actually survival of the most connected. So survival of those who fit in. And a lot of his naturalistic observations were in with other species, right? But he was actually also a father to 10 kids. So he did a lot of his human observations with his own children. And in particular, he had a daughter, Annie, who died when she was only 10 years old. And it really broke his heart. And some of his writings, Origin of Species, and some of his other writings were kind of informed by this experience that he had in his family, in his personal life. So let's look at some of the research that kind of supports Darwin's theories. So moms, when they see pictures of their baby, actually feel babies feel more connected or more loving towards their own babies than they do when they're shown images of other people's children. Okay, this is a mammalian thing. We recognize our young, we recognize our own, and our brains are actually uniquely kind of tuned in to that connection. I'll just share a brief personal story. So I have 5 kids, as I mentioned, and before we had children, I really had no interest in, seeing kids or holding kids or cooing with kids or being, nurturing kind of person. And I thought babies were kind of ugly, right? They come out of the womb, they've got these pointy heads, they look like little aliens, and I just couldn't relate to this parent thing. And then we had a baby, and she came, and I was like, whoa, this is a different experience. There was something in my brain that kind of trumped all of those other thoughts and feelings that I had had before. It just changed for me. And I've thought about that a lot. And, as I study this stuff, it makes sense, right? Like, it's part of our biology. It's not like a conscious thing. It's just part of who we are as a species. By the way, my favorite thing to do around newborn babies, because I still don't really like to hold other people's babies or coo or whatever with them, but the best thing you can do around newborns is watch people come around newborns and the faces that they make. Oh, look at that little boo-boo, and their voices get really high and they just act like fools, kind of. They just act completely different. It's really interesting, especially moms. It's not working again. Sweet. Okay, so we've also looked at research that shows that the opposite is true. So when people are shown images and videos of harm being done to other people, the same parts of their brain get activated. Okay, so that same part, that motherly kind of protective part, also gets activated. And it's not just, turns out, it's not just with our beneficiaries, with our children, with our loved ones, with our friends. It's actually common across humanity. So people can be shown these images of strangers, of out groups, right? Like people that aren't of their same group in whatever way. So there's something physical, something biological going on here. So we've also looked at brain activity when people are helping other people. And I think this is really cool. And this is probably one of the main reasons that you want to be compassionate. When people are helping, this really tiny red spot in the front right of your brain actually activates. And this is the same part of your brain that activates when you get any kind of reward. So when you beat a level on a video game, when you get some candy, anytime dopamine sort of activates in your brain, we get the same rush, the same benefit, the same feel-good chemicals going on in our brains when we're helping people. So if you're wanting that, if you're wanting to feel good, and of course, who doesn't want to feel good, then go help somebody, do some service. And I'll give you an example. So I have a 3-year-old daughter, and her and my wife, Julie, came to campus one day and to have lunch together. And my wife noticed that as she walked through campus, there was a lot of sullen faces. I think it was finals week or midterms or something like that. Anyways, of course, she walks through campus and she sees a lot of stressed out people, right? So she had this idea that she wanted to do something. And Hope, our daughter, really likes interacting with people. And so my wife hatched this idea that she would bring suckers, dum-dum suckers, to campus. And we attached a little slip of paper that said, "You're no dum-dum, good luck on your finals." It was finals week. Okay, and we passed out 100 suckers. Doesn't even make a tiny little ripple in the NAU community, right? But it was really fun. It was really fun to go hand those out, to watch Hope interact with students, to watch the students interact back with her and with us. It was really fun. And I was on a total high for the rest of the day after we did that. And that's, again, such a small little act, but it really felt good. So we're discovering that compassion has a biological basis, right? So does that mean that some people are just more compassionate than others? And it actually turns out that's true. Okay. So there are people who just have it in their genes. And this study I thought was pretty interesting. They videotaped two couples, two partners talking to each other about having a difficult experience. And then other people watched these videotape interactions, and they rated the partners on how compassionate they thought they were. And it turns out that there's a relationship between a particular type of genes, particular genotype. So the observers could pick out compassion in the partners, which is fascinating for me. So you can actually see, and you probably know people, right? Like you probably know people that you're just like, yeah, as soon as I meet you, like I know you're a really good person, and you're doing good in the world, and you just know by looking at them. And yeah, you actually can. And you know, there's examples kind of all around us of this happening. This gentleman in Brazil, the gentleman on the right was holding this poor woman hostage at gunpoint, and was, you know, wasn't going well. Of course, everyone was there. The police were there. This gentleman, Francisco Erasmo Rodriguez de Lima, he was just standing by. He was just a stranger on the street. And he saw what was going on. And rather than wait around to see what happened, he took action. And he rushed the perpetrator, and he took him out. And while he was doing that, the woman got away. She got out of the way. Unfortunately, Francisco took 2 shots himself and ended up later dying. And the authorities were able to subdue the perpetrator as well. So, you know, how do you explain that, right? Like, this is just a guy who was in his genes to do good. And, you know, again, we all know people like that, right? Like, some of us may be predisposed to run into a burning building. Some of us may be predisposed to devote our lives in service to other people. But there's good news if you're not one of those people, which I don't know if I'm one of those people, but I have learned to be compassionate, and you can be too. So I want you, so one of the ways that we do this is we reflect on people who have supported us in the past. So this is an interactive exercise. So I want you to take a few moments, and I want you to, if you want to, you can close your eyes for this activity, or you can keep them open. But I just want you to reflect on somebody in your life who has supported you. This might be a family member. This might be a friend. This might be a spiritual leader or a teacher. This might be a pet, right? Like maybe you have a dog that's just there for you when you need someone. So see if you can picture that person in your mind. And when you have them in your mind, I want you to imagine what it's like to be in their presence. What does it feel like to be with them? Or if you can think of a specific instance where they provided you support, and think about that moment, think about that example. And I want you to just let that sit, let that linger. And that might be a physical felt sense, it might be an emotional felt sense. I just want you to let that sink in, and absorb that. Breathe it in, soak it in. And if you feel like you want to, you can imagine sending these good wishes, sending this loving sort of intent, sending a prayer, however that makes best sense for you. But imagine yourself sending these good feelings, these good wishes back to that person. Just take a few more moments with that. When you're ready, you can open up your eyes again. Okay, so this is one of the ways that we can be more compassionate. When we feel that compassion from other people, we're more likely to be compassionate to others as well. So another way we can do this is we can look for commonalities. We can look for ways that we're similar instead of ways that we're different. And this is very different than the way our brain normally functions. Normally our brain functions and sort of looks for negativity, looks for difference. But we can intentionally look for things that are similar. And I'll give you an example. So I mentioned I'm a therapist, and I've worked in recovery a little bit, substance abuse recovery, and encouraged clients to attend support group meetings, AA meetings. And I learned a long time ago from a colleague that one of the most important things people can do when they go into these meetings is to go in looking for ways that they're similar to other people in the group. And people's outcomes from doing that in these support groups was vastly improved when they looked for similarities rather than differences. And this is true of, I mentioned Brene Brown's research. Shame is an isolating thing, right? So like if we think we're an unworthy, if we think we're a bad person, we tend to isolate, right? Like we separate ourselves from other human beings. And that increases feelings of isolation and shame and depression and unworthiness. So seeing other people as similar actually increases feelings of compassion, increases feelings of connectedness. So if you're trying to develop more compassion, see yourself as similar. Seeing people, as individuals. It turns out if you tell people a bunch of statistics about starvation, for example, or about violence, it's not as effective as if you name a person, if you show pictures of a person and you tell that story, that individual story. Again, I think it's back to that empathy, right? Like you can feel with another human being. I can't feel with a statistic. I can't feel with a problem. Okay? It's individual based. Obviously, combining both is best, right? So savoring is this concept of sort of taking it in. We did that a little bit just now when we thought of someone who's been compassionate towards us and who we felt supported in their presence. So I think of savoring like I like to hike and be in the backcountry. So if I've been hiking and if it's been 4 days or something, I'm really hungry, right? Like I'm sick of eating trail food. I want something to eat. So when I sit down to eat a meal, I'm really going to enjoy that like cooked meal. I'm going to take it in. I'm going to savor it. So we can do that when we're taking compassionate action, or when we've been the recipient of compassionate action. We can take a few moments and just let it sink in. Really savor it. And it goes both ways, right? So like when we've acted in benefit to someone else, we can take that in. That feels good. But if we just like, okay, that feels good, what's for dinner? Or that feels good, I need to study. Or that feels good, and we kind of move on to the next thing. That's not going to stick. That's not going to sink in. We got to take a little bit of time with it. And here's just some other pictures of savoring. Kid looks thirsty. If you've ever been outdoors and it's cold, the fire feels so good. When you've been apart from someone that you love. Okay, so here's one of the risks of compassion. And again, this happens a lot in our work as therapists, or anyone who does caretaking work, is usually we get into those fields, or even if you're not doing it professionally, even if you're just a caretaker, like probably some of you in this room are the kind of person that your friends come to and tell you everything, right? Or maybe multiple friends come in to tell you things. Maybe you do hair and people tell the hairdressers everything too. But anyways, if you have that kind of resonance with somebody, if you're empathic and you understand the feelings of others, there is also kind of a risk to that. So the more resonance, the more empathy that we have for people, we can really feel suffering. And compassion is about seeing the suffering in other people and feeling the suffering of other people. So it is somewhat painful to see and experience and feel that. Gosh, we're doing a whole series of workshops on compassion fatigue right now. So I've got all these thoughts, but we'll just keep it simple. So reminding yourself that you're not the cause of this person's suffering. Reminding yourself that you're different people, that you're there to help. You're not there to kind of be taken over by their distress. And that's tough to do. And I don't know if I put this in here or not. Yeah, I did. Great. So we use these terms to talk about this kind of problem of being overwhelmed or burdened by the suffering of other people. And the first one is compassion collapse. So this is a phenomenon where people, see a lot of suffering. So think about the images and the stories that we're exposed to of war in foreign countries, or of poverty in the United States, where there's lots of people kind of affected by really troubling things. And if we feel that, if we're resonating with that, and we see that suffering and kind of experience that suffering, if we feel like we can't do anything to help, then that's what compassion collapse is. So it's this combination of having, really strong empathic resonance and feeling like we can't do anything about that. Has anyone ever felt like that before? Seeing things that are going on, raise your hands, going on in the world, and you're like, oh man, I can't do anything about that. What do I do? Okay. That's compassion collapse. There's actually some research that shows that one of the protective factors against compassion collapse is your own personal experience with suffering. So if you've suffered in life, you tend to be more resilient against compassion collapse. So if you haven't suffered a lot in your life, you don't have to go out and suffer. But it turns out that that's kind of a protective factor against collapse. And then compassion fatigue is a little bit different. So compassion fatigue is more like exhaustion. So after you've been caretaking and helping people over long periods of time, it just kind of wears you out. So think of kind of the average person here, and then think of caregivers here. So physicians, nurses, caregivers of parents, caregivers of children, parents of special needs children, therapists, sometimes teachers or other caregivers. These would be people that would be more at risk for compassion fatigue because of that prolonged exposure. Humanitarian workers, healthcare workers. And the symptoms of that are very similar, it turns out, to anxiety, depression, and some of those conditions, right? So we get distracted. We tend to replay those stories over and over and over and over in our minds. And you've maybe heard about difficult suffering experiences of others, and you just can't get it out of your head. So that's characteristic of compassion fatigue. Fear and anxiety, so there's emotional as well. Stress, irritability, lack of empathy is one of the signs that you're kind of burnt out, like you're just, it's time to do something, it's time to get some help, when you just don't seem to care anymore, and that's uncharacteristic for you. People gain and lose a lot of weight when they're in compassion fatigue. People have a lot of problems sleeping in compassion fatigue and are just fatigued. Okay, that's pretty obvious. People can get really impulsive, which means you're acting without thinking, or compulsive, which means you're just doing the same thing over and over and over again. So it affects us in a lot of ways. And I'm just throwing this up there as kind of a caution, that it's really important, if you're a caregiver, or if you're an empath, if you're someone that feels with people a lot, or if you're that friend who, your friends come to you and tell you about, significant things, struggles that they're having, just to take care of yourself. And that's where we come back to the self-compassion. Okay, the 3 directions, and if you remember that slide, we have to be able to take care of ourselves if we're to help other people, and allow other people to help us too, if we're going to be able to help. So when we talk about self-compassion, these are some of the ways that you can exercise self-compassion for yourself. So physical, emotional. I want to speak a little bit about the pleasurable activities. There is a difference, it turns out, between distraction and rejuvenation or recovery. So pleasurable activities should involve some element of I feel better afterwards, right? Not just I forgot about the problems of the world and got away from them for a little while, but what can you do to make yourself sort of refill your cup, make yourself feel stronger? And, you know, we've all had a restful night's sleep where we wake up and we're like, oh man, I feel so much better. And then we've all probably had I slept for 14 hours today and I feel like crap. Okay, so that's an example. If we're engaging in pleasurable activities and we don't feel good afterwards, it's probably not the best tool to use when you're trying to recover from fatigue, from compassion fatigue especially. We practice a little bit taking in the good. Creative pursuits really help with emotional health. And then spiritual health, just finding time to be quiet. Again, there's so much information, there's so much going on that finding time to be silent, to be still, to just not do, but just to be, is really powerful and really rejuvenating. So we're going to talk for a minute about in a minute about the kind of fierce side of compassion. But there is also, sometimes with fatigue, with compassion fatigue, you just need to limit some things, right? Like you need to set up some parameters and some boundaries around what you're doing to caretake other people. So it might be that your friend tries to talk to you and you're not able to listen, you're not able to really be present with that person. You know, you might need to say, this isn't really a good time for me. I appreciate you trusting me with this, but I can't do that right now. And setting those boundaries will help you recover, and then be available to them later or to other people as needed. You need your own support, right? So make sure that you're getting the support that you need if you're a caretaker or if you're an empath. Make sure that you're allowing other people to help you as well, and that you're asking for help. And at some point, if you need help, you're going to have to ask out loud. We're not very good at mind reading. Even therapists of decades are not very good at reading minds. So at some point, you kind of do have to ask for help. Okay, we're going to keep going here. So with compassion, there's kind of two sides, and this slide talks about self-compassion, but you can generalize it to all kinds of compassion. So there's the comforting, soothing, aww kind of compassion, this validating kind of compassion, which is what we normally associate with compassion. But there's also this whole other side of compassion that's sometimes called fierce compassion. But this is again, this innate part of us or learned part of us that is protective and motivated and tough and angry, okay, at some injustices in the world. If you're seeing suffering in other people, and you're not okay with it, you're outraged or you're angry, this is the fierce side of compassion. Okay. Can't walk away from the computer. So I put up this burning building because I like this idea of, you know, is it not just as compassionate if you're, you know, trying to comfort someone that's in a burning building and protect them? Is it not, wouldn't leaving the burning building also be compassionate, right? Like staying in the burning building and dying in fire because you're being comforting and nurturing, that doesn't make any sense, right? So getting out of the building makes just as much sense. And I like that analogy a lot. So when we talk about things like non-aggression, we don't think about that as weakness. So think about Martin Luther King Jr., for example, peaceful protester, nonviolent activist. I would never think of Martin Luther King as weak. Okay, he was meek for sure, but not weak. He was revolutionary. You know, he changed the world. He changed the country for good, and he was fierce and compassionate. Let's see, who else could we think of? Thich Nhat Hanh. Is anyone familiar with Thich Nhat Hanh at all? Okay, a few of you. So Thich Nhat Hanh is a mindfulness teacher from Vietnam and a monk, and he was an outspoken sort of not proponent. What's the opposite of proponent? He spoke against the Vietnam War, and was not welcome in Vietnam. He was exiled from Vietnam, and continued to be an active anti-war advocate in the United States here with Martin Luther King and other people, and really fierce guy, and definitely compassionate. But so when you think about people like this too in your life. So who can you think of that embodies these kind of qualities of strength and courage and empowerment? Someone that's going to stand up to injustice and do that in a nonviolent way. And if you can think of that person, then that's compassion, right? I'm trying to remember what the next one is. Okay. So we're going to talk about anger here in a minute. But there is a role for anger and outrage in compassion. You can simultaneously be angry and outraged and also compassionate. Maybe. Thank you. Let's go one more. So, near enemies is this concept, again in Buddhism, where they talk about things that look similar, but are actually opposed to one another. So, back to anger for a second. So, if we experience feelings like anger and outrage, part of the way that we stay with that in compassion is that we're mindful, right? So mindfulness is this quality of sort of separating ourselves or not identifying with these feelings. And Gandhi was a really good example of this. He did experience anger, but he did not let that sort of get out of hand. He kept his feelings under control, but he allowed himself to feel that. And when we're emotionally reactive, we tend to do things that aren't compassionate, right? So I'll give you an example. This is something that happened last week in my life. I'm renting a home right now and signed a lease through the end of March. And the landlords haven't been easy to work with. It's been really difficult renting this home from them. And I hadn't heard from them actually since October. And the other day, the landlady texts me and says, your lease is coming due at the end of March. What are your plans? What are you going to do? And I said, well, we hadn't really thought about it yet. So we're going to look into some houses, but we haven't been looking that seriously yet. We were hoping we could just stay here month to month after the lease was up until we find a home. And she kind of launched into a tirade. Now, this is text, so I don't know exactly what she was thinking or feeling, right? But she did say, well, I don't want an empty house at the end of the summer and the fall and the winter, and you need to let me know what's going on, and you need to sign a year lease or you're out. Basically, those weren't her exact words. And 30 days, 45 days to get out of a house, to move a family of 5, 6 out of the house. I was really, really angry and felt really betrayed, really upset, and despairing too. I mean, I definitely didn't know what we were going to do, where we were going to live. And that initial reaction was to lash back at her with something, any number of creative words. But I took a minute and reflected. I'm a mindfulness meditation teacher and have been practicing for 10 years, and just gave myself a moment to not respond, to stop and take a few breaths and think about what I was doing. And as I was doing that, those feelings of anger were there, those feelings of betrayal were there, but also I remembered the rest of the story. So when we moved here, we didn't have a place to stay. 2 weeks before I started my job, we happened to find her through this. Long story short, we found her. It was kind of miraculous that we found her and that we were able to find a place to live, because we were pretty desperate. And from our side of things, we paid her mortgage for the last 9 months or 8 months and took good care of her house, right? So it was this mutually beneficial thing. And once I slowed down and looked at that, I was still mad. I was still frustrated. I still didn't know where we were going to live. But rather than being reactive, I was able to say, thank you for giving us a place to live for the last 8 months. I don't know what we're going to do. We're going to start looking for houses. And it worked. It worked really well. She came back early this week and said, you can stay there as long as you need to. The good news in the story is we found a house to buy, and we're under contract now. So it was a push to get us out there. So the near enemy to one of the near enemies to fierce compassion is this reactivity. Okay, next one. This is Thich Nhat Hanh, by the way. So we talked about common humanity a little bit. So one of the barriers to compassion is when we feel like we're better than other people, right? When we feel like our views are the right views, my way is the right way. And there's a lot of this in the world right now, right? Like people who hold different views are sort of demonized and just put in this sort of out group, right? Our world is very polarized right now. Don't even get me started on politics. I won't go there. But common humanity, in contrast, says that we're all human. We have more alike than we do not alike. And I thought that was captured really well in this poem that he wrote. And I'll let you read the poem. But kind of taking that perspective and holding, different views. And again, going back to that earlier slide, that if we see people as people, it's easier to facilitate those feelings of compassion than if we're seeing people as a problem or as an other. And then the third way, we'll talk about sort of how to get out of the way of fierce compassion. So when we're fiercely compassionate, we're motivated to protect and to provide and to be kind. And we have lots of examples of this. Martin Luther King's one of my favorite examples of this. He was tough. He was strong. He said things are not okay and we need to change them. But he didn't see people as the enemy. So he was more against the injustice, right, of discrimination, not against a person. So that's one of the ways that we can kind of balance our fierce compassion too. So this is just a personal test. If you're in that grip of anger, if you're over-identified with anger, if you can't let it go, if you're being reactive, if you feel better than or superior to someone, you know, this is kind of a tangent, but this goes for self-esteem too. So we'll talk more about this in the self-compassion workshop, but there is a difference between self-compassion and self-esteem. Self-esteem comes from being unique, from being different, and therefore being better than or worse than, right? Like think of people that have high self-esteem. They're different in a better way, right? Like they're better than others, okay? Or at something, you know, maybe it's intellect, maybe it's physical, maybe it's social. But in order to have high self-esteem, you have to be different. Where with compassion, it's more like common humanity, right? So we have more in common. And it turns out that self-compassion is much, much more effective than self-esteem in determining people's happiness and how they treat other people. Okay, we'll keep going. So we're going to end with this today. I'm going to guide you through a meditative practice. One of the best ways to be non-reactive and, let's see, I'll sit over here. To kind of stay within your values and within your compassion, and to help yourself when you're feeling fatigued or whatever in compassion, is to practice mindfulness. So there's various forms of mindfulness meditation. We're going to do a compassion practice today called loving kindness. So if you can make yourself 10% more comfortable by shifting your position or putting something aside, we're going to try and embody, I know it's late in the day, maybe it's been a long day for some of you, maybe you're tired. We're going to try and embody not all, in addition to kind of a relaxed presence, we're going to try and embody an alert one. So if you can kind of, you know, imagine yourself moving kind of in two directions, one up towards the sky, one down towards the earth. You can place your feet flat on the ground if you'd like to. Rest your hands in your lap or on your chair. And again, if you'd like to, you're welcome to close your eyes. And if that's not available to you, that's okay too. Just maybe gazing softly ahead of you or down in front of you. And we're just going to take a moment to check in with ourselves in this moment. So maybe noticing any thoughts that are going through your mind right now. Specific thoughts, or maybe even just how quickly or slowly your thoughts are moving. What direction they're going in. Are they going in a straight line, or is it more like in a circle? Thoughts maybe are bouncing all over the place. Maybe you're thinking about how your day was earlier or what you got going on after this. No need to change your thoughts or do anything with them. We're just being present with them. The same thing with your emotions, just checking in with how you're feeling. Maybe your brain's kind of not working that great. Maybe you're kind of sluggish. Maybe you're worried or concerned. Maybe you've got something exciting going on tonight, so you're kind of in anticipation or optimistic, looking forward to something. Again, just checking in emotionally with where we're at. And then checking in with the body too, just noticing what it feels like to be in your body right now. Perhaps noticing the contact of your feet with the floor or your seat with the chair. Maybe scanning through your body, noticing any areas of comfort or ease, or perhaps even discomfort or tension or pain. And then seeing if you can find your breath within your body. So noticing your body breathing. Where is that most evident? Maybe it's in your nostrils or in your throat or your shoulders and chest. Just following the breath down into your abdomen. And again, no need to breathe a certain rhythm or pace. Just following the breath in, to, and out of the body. And if your mind wanders, that's okay. Just allowing it, or allowing yourself to notice that it's wandering, that you have a normal mind. Just bringing it back to your breath. And taking a moment again to imagine a loved one, someone who you automatically smile when you think of them, or you feel positive when you think of them. And choosing someone, again, that could be a family member, it could be a friend, could be a beloved animal, a teacher, a neighbor, preferably someone who you don't have too complicated a relationship with, but just someone who, when you think of them, automatically or spontaneously you have positive feelings. And trying to picture that person in your mind's eye and imagine them being in front of you, imagine them being close to you, and feeling what it's like to be in their presence. And as you hold them in awareness, taking a few moments silently to yourself to wish them well. You can repeat these phrases to yourself silently, or you can repeat other phrases. Just wishing them well. May you be safe. May you be healthy to whatever degree possible. May you be happy. May you be at ease. Perhaps not repeating it rotely or without feeling, but just the feeling, imagining the feeling behind the phrases. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be happy. And may you be at ease. So resting again in these feelings of love and kindness for this other person. And as you lose those words or feelings, that's not really a problem. You can always just come back to your breath. And if you have that person in your mind's eye still, as you rest in this feeling of loving kindness, imagining the other person saying to you well wishes. So may you be safe, meaning you. Imagining them saying to you, may you be healthy and happy to whatever degree possible. And may you live in ease. So again, imagining this person repeating these phrases to you, more with the energy and the intent, more than the specific phrases themselves. And again, if that's difficult to imagine, or if your mind wanders, that's not a problem. So when you feel like you've rested in this field of loving kindness, try and bring to your mind's eye someone with whom you're barely acquainted, perhaps even a stranger or someone that you see day to day or occasionally that you haven't really thought much of or haven't interacted with much. Someone that you might see occasionally, or someone, perhaps a store clerk or a classmate or a neighbor. Seeing if you can bring the image of them into your mind. Imagine what it's like to be with them and in their presence. And wishing them well. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be happy. And may you be at ease. Again, repeating those phrases to yourself. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be happy. And may you be at ease. Continuing with these feelings or resting in these feelings of loving kindness, allowing yourself to soak them in, to savor them. And if you'd like to stop there, you can, or if you feel ready or able, maybe calling to mind somebody in your life with whom you have a more difficult relationship, someone who's challenging to you in one way or another. And this could be someone that you know personally, or it could be someone that you don't know very well at all, or it could be a total stranger. Just imagining this person being in front of you, getting a sense again of what it feels like to be with them, to see them, what they look like, what they sound like. Just aware again of the sensations in the body and feelings and thoughts that might be arising for you, perhaps unpleasant. Just seeing if you can stick with those. Just be with that unpleasant. And if or when you're ready, offering those same compassionate phrases to this difficult person. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be happy. And may you be at ease. And at any point, you can go back to your beloved person or to yourself and just rest here. Taking a few more breaths. As we draw the practice to a close, just allowing the best parts of the experience to sink in. And when you're ready, opening up your eyes, taking some movement, whatever feels nourishing. Well, that's what I've got for you today. Thanks for participating. Any questions that have come up during the presentation? Okay. If not, have a great day. Have a great semester. Take care.